I didn't know where we were going, only that we weren't going home. A door. A lock. Breath fogging the glass. Night pressed against the windows like it wanted in. Some sounds never leave, the drag of a seatbelt, the click that decides what happens next. People think fear is shouting, but sometimes it's a room so quiet you can hear the lamp thinking. I tried to count the turns. Left, then left again. Forest swallowing the road. No stars. My name felt smaller in my mouth each mile we drove. If I spoke it out loud, would it find me a way back? I closed my eyes and held on to a thin thread of light, imagined, borrowed, stubborn. 7 years later, that thread would be a door. But on this night, it was only a promise I wasn't ready to break. I was 7. Shoes too big for my steps, a backpack that clicked when the zipper bounced. He spoke like someone who had practiced sounding safe. "Your mom sent me," he said. "Hop in before you catch a cold." The car smelled like old rain and cold coffee. The vinyl seat sighed when I sat. I told myself to remember everything, the crack in the dashboard, a stain shaped like a map, the way his eyes lived in the mirror instead of his face. "Seatbelt," he said, gentle, like a good habit. I obeyed because I had been taught to. A shadow shifted in the back, more a temperature than a person. A presence. A breath where no one should breathe. The door shut and the lock found itself like it had done this before. The road unrolled and took my name with it. People teach you that danger is a shout. Sometimes it's a whisper that knows your size. I watched the neighborhood thin into fields, fields into trees, and trees into a kind of darkness that doesn't need the night. I tried to think like a grown-up, if I keep calm, if I ask the right question, if I am polite enough to be spared. "Are we close?" I asked. "Not far," he answered, the words flat as a closed book. I pressed my palm against the glass and felt the cold tell me the truth. The world I understood was now behind me, shrinking with every mile. I didn't cry. Not then. I counted breaths and promised myself not to disappear. But promises are hard to keep when the road forgets who you are. The road changed its voice. Asphalt became gravel, and the car hummed like it was keeping a secret. Headlights carved ribs into the forest, trees stood like tall, patient guards. "Almost there," he said, as if that should comfort me. The mirror held his eyes the way a net holds water, badly, but enough. We turned where there was no corner, followed a path only the car could see. Houses were memories now, porches, dogs, mailboxes, all erased by the dark. He stopped in a clearing the moon had given up on. Fog made everything close and far at the same time. The trunk opened. A paper bag rustled. "Change into these," he said, handing me clothes that felt like they belonged to a stranger I would soon have to be. He waited without watching, the cruelest kind of privacy. "Your name is Dennis now. Names are bridges. Take away the bridge and the river gets wider." I held the shirt and tried to imagine what Dennis liked to eat, what he laughed at, how he answered the roll call in a class that wasn't his. Inside the car, the heater ticked like a tired heart. My breath drew shapes on the window that faded before I could learn them. "Buckle up," he said softly, as if kindness could be a leash. We drove deeper. The radio was off, but a song I didn't know was playing anyway, the rhythm of tires, a hush of pine, the silence between us that decided to stay. I watched for signs, a crooked fence, a fallen tree, a bend that looked like a question mark. I repeated them in my head like a path home I might need in a future that didn't have a date yet. When I asked, "How much longer?" he said, "Not long," and meant forever. I pressed my fingertips into the seat until I felt something solid that wasn't fear. If you can't keep your name, keep a map, if only in your mouth. I whispered Steven into the dark and promised not to forget the sound. The cabin wore the smell of wet wood and closed air, a place that had practiced being alone. Curtains hung heavy, swallowing whatever the windows tried to say. A lamp trembled on a table like it wasn't sure it should be here either. "Don't worry," he said, as if worry were a coat I could hang by the door. "Your mother will come in the morning. Lies are softer when they wear tomorrow." The key turned with a patience that made my skin colder. Metal knowing its job. A click that sounded like a decision. Through a thin seam in the curtain I watched taillights bleed into the trees, red threads unspooling until there was only a thicker kind of dark. Voices seeped through the wall, another man, words folded small, two tones performing something that had been rehearsed. In the corner, a small bed with a blanket printed in stars. I sat on the edge and held my jacket like it was a person. I tried to organize the room into a map, door, lamp, window, crack in floorboard, a nail bent like a hook. The inventory of someone who doesn't get to leave. Hunger arrived and left without asking anything of me. Thirst stood at the edge of the room and didn't cross over. I counted the seconds between his steps in the other room and learned the distance of a hallway I hadn't walked. When the lamp finally settled, the silence got big enough to sit in my lap. Sometimes the night doesn't end, it just runs out of places to hide. I slept because my body decided to, not because my mind agreed. Sleep was borrowing someone else's coat, someone else's air. If morning came, I would ask it to be louder than the lock. If it didn't, I would add its absence to the list of things I had to carry without dropping. I pulled the star blanket up to my chin and practiced the shape my real name makes behind my teeth. I would need it later. I didn't know when. I only knew I didn't want to meet the day without it. Morning didn't arrive, it leaked. Thin light slipped through wooden boards like it had been fined for being late. He entered with a plate and a glass, a kindness dressed in rules. "Eat," he said. "Be good, and it's easier." His voice had no hills, only a flat road where questions went to tire out. "When can I go home?" I asked, the smallest voice I could still call mine. He set the plate down and arranged the words carefully. "Your mother doesn't want you anymore. I'll take care of you now." The room didn't move, but something in it went missing. He listed rules like furniture: don't leave without me. Don't talk loud. Don't answer to the wrong name. Forget Steven, he said. You are Dennis. He made me repeat it until the syllables felt like stones in my mouth. Dennis. Again. Dennis. Again. If you say a thing enough times, the air tries to believe you. The heart takes longer. I ate because the body knows its own math. Half a sandwich, a small drink, one boy pretending not to tremble. He showed me the hallway like a museum you could look at but not touch. Kitchen. Bathroom. A radio that never found a station. A door that opened onto another door. Later, alone, I stood at the window and measured the light between the boards. One beam was wider, I chose it as my sky. I practiced being quiet until quiet seemed like a language I might become fluent in. When the house dozed, I searched for edges, a loose screw, a floorboard that gave a little, the way the key turned twice most days but once when he was tired. Survival is a small math: to notice, remember, repeat. By evening, the rules had learned my shape. They fit, but only because I stopped breathing in all the way. That night, I tucked my real name under my tongue and pretended to sleep beside it. No one could take what they couldn't hear. Days stopped belonging to numbers. I tried to mark them with scratches in the wood, but the grain always won. I learned the rhythm of the house, the way boards sighed, the way his steps announced moods, the long pause before a key decided which side of the door it liked better. Sometimes he spoke softly, offering a cup of cocoa as if it could wash away everything it followed. Sometimes he said nothing at all and silence took his shape instead. The radio stayed broken. The clock on the wall ticked out of time. He called me Dennis every hour on the hour, until even the air answered to it. When night came, I watched shadows swim along the ceiling and tried to imagine each one as a wave. If I could name them fast enough, maybe one would carry me home. I began to collect small things that still listened to me, the hiss of the kettle, the hum of a fly against glass, the sound of rain spelling something I couldn't read. Fear became furniture, a chair that never moved, a table that remembered the shape of my hands. I learned that kindness can bruise, and routine can hide the teeth behind it. Once, he stood in the doorway longer than doors should allow. The lamp flickered. He smiled like a man explaining weather, then left without speaking. After he was gone, I stared at the spot where his shoes had been until the floor forgot them. That night I promised myself a secret: if I couldn't leave, I'd at least notice everything. Because memory, I decided, was another kind of map, and I was already drawing mine in the dark. Morning arrived like an apology it didn't mean. He left the door open an inch, the smallest mercy pretending to be trust. "I think I can trust you," he said, setting cocoa on the table. Trust. The word looked lighter in his mouth than it felt in mine. He let me sweep the floor. Touch the radio. Stand in the kitchen like sunlight was permission. The house started pretending to be a home, and I pretended back. On some days we drove to town. I wore a cap too big and a name too small. He called me Dennis for everyone to hear, and I nodded, because what else do you do when a lie feeds you? I memorized the shape of the store, the color of the sign above the door, the distance from the parking lot to the payphone. Every step, every turn, a stitch in the map I kept hidden behind my eyes. If I smiled just right, people didn't look long enough to ask questions. I became very good at being ordinary. Back home, he hummed while cooking. I watched the knife move through bread and wondered if sharpness was born that way or learned. When he looked up, I smiled and said thank you. Even pretending kindness felt dangerous, but danger was a language I spoke well by then. That night, lying in bed, I replayed the day like a movie that could change if I wished hard enough. Tomorrow, I thought, maybe I'll be braver. But bravery is a coin you don't get to spend twice. For now, I would keep learning the house, memorizing its secrets, waiting for one to forget itself long enough for me to notice. The first time I saw sunlight without a curtain between us, I almost looked away. It was too honest. He told me to smile when we went outside. "People worry if you don't smile," he said. So I practiced in the mirror until it looked real enough to borrow. In town, everything was loud voices, cars, laughter that didn't belong to us. He walked beside me, hand on my shoulder like punctuation at the end of every step. "Remember," he whispered, "you're Dennis." A cashier asked my age. Before I could open my mouth, he answered for me, 7, almost 8. The lie landed like a feather, it barely touched the counter. But it stayed in my chest, heavy as stone. On the drive back, I counted signs. Gas 5 miles. Redwood Road. Exit 34. Landmarks of a life no one knew I was living. At home, he hummed again, always the same tune, always off key. Routine makes captivity sound like comfort. I went to my room and traced invisible lines on the floor, the route from window to door to freedom I couldn't measure. That night, I whispered my real name into my hands and let the sound stay there, small and warm. Some prayers are just reminders. When I finally slept, I dreamed of sidewalks and voices that knew how to call me back. Dreams are the only place you can run without getting caught. He liked quiet mornings. The kind where the world outside forgot to move. We ate in silence, the radio a dead heartbeat in the corner. Later, he fixed it, or pretended to. A voice cracked through static, a missing child. The name floated out of the speaker and landed on the table like glass. Steven Stayner. My name, spoken by someone who still believed I could hear it. He didn't look at me. Didn't have to. The silence that followed was a leash. I turned the dial until the voice drowned in static. Music, I said. It's just music. He smiled, and for a moment I thought the air might shatter. That night, the sound followed me into sleep. I dreamed of sirens and open doors. When I woke, the dream still breathed beside me. I sat by the window, tracing letters on fogged glass Steven until they vanished. Sometimes I wondered if disappearing was a kind of safety. The next morning, he asked if I'd slept well. Yes, I lied. Lies are lighter than truth but leave deeper footprints. He poured cereal. I thanked him. We lived our parts like actors who hated the play but loved the applause. That day I realized, surviving isn't about strength. It's about staying small enough to fit between the moments that can hurt you. And I was becoming very good at that. Winter came early that year, or maybe time just forgot what month it was. Frost painted the windows white, the kind of white that hides everything beneath it. One morning a car stopped outside. Tires whispered against gravel. He said, "Stay here," and stepped out. When he returned, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a smaller boy, pale and silent, clutching the edge of his sleeve. "This is Timmy," he said. "He'll be with us for a while." I looked at the boy and saw my own fear wearing a new face. Timmy stared at the floor, eyes too wide for his age. I wanted to tell him it gets easier, but that would have been another lie. The man spoke softly, giving the same rules I once learned: don't speak loud, don't wander, don't question. His words folded the air into the same small box we already lived in. That night, Timmy slept beside me on the other bed. I lay awake listening to the rhythm of his breath, fast, shallow, learning to hide. I remembered being that quiet. I remembered thinking quiet could save you. When the house finally stilled, I whispered, "It's okay," even though it wasn't. For the first time, the silence answered back. It sounded like courage, small, cracked, but breathing. I realized then, maybe I couldn't escape alone. Maybe survival wasn't about waiting for someone to find me. Maybe it was about learning how to open the door myself. After that winter night, everything in the house sounded different. Doors sighed deeper, floors held their breath longer. I began to count each sound, learning which ones belonged to him and which belonged to the wind. Timmy asked when we could go home. I told him soon. It was the kind of lie that hopes to become true if you whisper it softly enough. He kept the key on a nail near the doorway, trusting the habit of fear more than the lock itself. When he left for work, I watched the nail until it looked back. A plan doesn't begin with courage, it begins with noticing. I learned which step creaked, which window stuck, which board lifted just enough to hide a secret. In the nights between, I told Timmy stories about a place with no walls. He would close his eyes, and for a moment, the world forgot its rules. One evening he fell asleep early. The house was quiet except for a radio murmuring about a storm that might never come. I moved to the door, slow as dust. The nail was empty, the key cold in my hand. When the car lights returned outside, I slipped the key into my sleeve. The metal felt alive, like it knew what it was for. Timmy stirred and whispered, "Is it tomorrow yet?" "Almost," I said. We both knew almost could stretch for miles. I lay down and stared at the ceiling, the key pressing against my wrist. It hurt just enough to remind me that hope still had teeth. The house slept heavy that night. He snored in the other room, a slow growl that measured the dark. I waited for the rhythm to settle before I moved. "Timmy," I whispered. His eyes opened, full of questions he didn't ask. I pressed a finger to my lips and pointed to the door. The key turned once, then caught. I held my breath, turned again. A soft click, like the world agreeing to give us one small chance. We stepped into the hallway. Shadows lay across the floor like ropes we had to step over. The front door stood at the far end, smaller than I remembered. Timmy's hand found mine, just for balance. I counted 3 heartbeats and pushed. Cold air rushed in, sharp enough to taste. We didn't run. We walked like ghosts that had studied how to be quiet. The gravel bit through our socks. The trees swallowed us before the door had time to scream. For a moment, I looked back. The cabin sat in the dark, pretending to sleep. I wasn't sure if I'd left part of myself inside or if the silence was finally empty. "Which way?" Timmy asked. "Forward," I said. It was the first true word I'd spoken in years. The forest didn't want us, but it didn't stop us either. Snow caught in our hair, branches whispered directions we couldn't trust. We ran until running became walking, then stumbling, then simply not stopping. I counted steps, breaths, the space between lightning and thunder. Every sound could be him, every silence could be worse. Timmy shivered beside me. I took his hand, not to comfort but to keep him real. "Almost there," I said again. When the trees opened, the road waited wide, empty, shining with frost. We crouched behind a fallen log and watched the dark. A hum grew, a car, or maybe the storm catching up. Headlights stitched the world back together. I stepped onto the road before I had time to change my mind. The driver's brakes cried. Light washed over us, blinding, holy. "Please," I said, voice breaking in half. "Help us." The man's face behind the glass shifted from confusion to fear to something like faith. He opened the door slowly, as if we might vanish if he moved too fast. "Get in," he said. The heater smelled like dust and gasoline. Timmy curled up beside me, already asleep. I stared at my reflection in the window, half boy, half ghost, and waited for the road to remember who I was. The car filled with a silence that was finally safe. The driver kept one hand on the wheel and one on the radio. He spoke softly, words meant to steady us more than to fill the air. He called the police, voice trembling only once. Sirens arrived like a promise trying to keep itself. Red and blue light cut through the snow, each flash another heartbeat I thought I'd lost. A policeman leaned in. "Name?" My throat closed around it. Then, from somewhere that had waited 7 years, the truth forced its way out. "My name is Steven." The officer froze, eyes wide, radio crackling with disbelief. I heard my name repeated over and over, traveling farther than I ever could. It sounded strange, alive again, too big for my chest. In the back of the ambulance, Timmy slept under a blanket. I kept touching my wrist where the key had once been, as if proof needed to be felt. Through the window, the night passed backwards, forest, road, the ghosts we didn't know anymore. When dawn broke, I didn't look away. I wanted to see what a new day looked like without bars around it. The police station buzzed with questions, lights, and coffee that tasted like relief. They said my family was coming. I stood still, afraid that moving might wake me from it. The door opened. My mother froze. So did I. 7 years of words vanished before they reached our mouths. She crossed the room in seconds that took forever. Her hands found my face, gentle and disbelieving. My father's hand landed on my shoulder, grounding me to the moment. Everyone else disappeared. Reporters whispered. Cameras clicked. But I only saw the shape of home standing in front of me. At night, in a borrowed bedroom, I couldn't sleep. Safety was too loud. Every creak still sounded like a footstep. I went to the window and watched cars pass, ordinary lives glowing in taillights. I whispered thank you, not sure who it was, for God, luck, the driver, the boy who refused to give up. Home doesn't erase what happened. It teaches you how to stand inside it anyway. When morning came, I watched sunlight spill across the floorboards and decided to keep standing. The days after the rescue blurred into one long interview. Police, reporters, doctors, all asking the same question in different shapes: how does freedom feel? I wanted to tell them freedom is quiet. It doesn't shout or celebrate. It sits beside you and waits to see if you'll believe in it. At home, the curtains stayed open, but the air still smelled like locked doors. My mother checked windows without meaning to. My father spoke softly, as if a loud word could send me back. They wanted to fill the silence with answers. I wanted to leave it empty until I could trust the sound of my own breathing. The news showed my face next to words like miracle and return. People sent letters, toys, prayers from strangers who thought survival meant victory. They didn't see the boy learning how to sleep through ordinary nights. When cameras left, the questions stayed. Do you hate him? Do you remember everything? I remembered too much. I sat on my bed and tried to teach myself the alphabet of peace. B for breathing. C for closing my eyes without fear. H for home. Sometimes I turned the radio on just to hear static. It sounded like nothing, which finally felt safe. Freedom, I decided, isn't the opposite of captivity. It's what you build when no one else is telling you who to be. And I was still learning how to build. School began again like a play I hadn't auditioned for. Hallways too bright, laughter too loud. Everyone knew my name but not where to look when they said it. Teachers whispered, friends hovered, their kindness heavy as pity. I tried to move through the days without tripping over my own story. At home, dinner smelled normal, too normal. Forks clicked against plates like metronomes keeping time with memory. I pretended to eat, my family pretended not to watch. At night, shadows crawled back under the door. I told myself they couldn't touch me here, but they still knew my name. Therapists said healing takes time. I wondered what time owed me in return. Sometimes I stood outside just to feel the wind push back. It was proof the world still had edges. I drew maps again, not of escape, but of places I wanted to reach: a park, a movie theater, a stretch of road with nothing to fear. Slowly, I stopped checking locks before sleep. Some nights, I even forgot to. That's how I measured progress, by what I forgot to fear. Each morning I opened my window wider. Each day the air came in a little less broken. Healing isn't a straight line. It's a circle you learn to walk without falling. I grew older, though sometimes it felt like aging inside someone else's skin. Therapy taught me to translate what my silence had been saying all those years. Anger, grief, guilt, they spoke in accents I barely understood. Writing helped. A notebook became the first place that didn't flinch. I filled it with memories like fragile glass, labeling each one: keep, let go, still dangerous. I rode a bike down streets that used to scare me. Each turn reclaimed a piece of ground I'd once lost. When people asked if I'd forgiven him, I said I was still deciding what forgiveness meant. Maybe it wasn't for him. Maybe it was the moment I stopped letting fear finish my sentences. I volunteered at shelters, met others who had been taken from their lives and stitched back in. We didn't talk about details. We talked about mornings, about small joys that didn't apologize for existing. The first time I laughed without checking the door, I realized survival had finally grown into living. And living felt like sunlight after years of borrowed lamps. There came a day when silence no longer felt like safety. I began to speak to classrooms, to cameras, to anyone who needed proof that the dark doesn't win just because it's patient. Standing on stages felt strange at first. The lights too bright, the air too still. But then I'd see faces leaning forward, waiting for permission to believe their own story could change. I'm not special, I told them. I just stayed alive long enough to find my way home. Every word I spoke built a bridge back to the boy who once couldn't speak at all. Hope, I learned, isn't loud. It's the quiet decision to wake up again. After each talk, someone would come up, trembling, saying, "Me too." And I'd realize the story was no longer just mine. It belonged to everyone who'd ever wanted to be found. I ended every talk the same way: you don't need to be fearless. You just need to keep walking. And every time I said it, I believed it a little more. Sometimes I still dream of that first road, the one that forgot its name. But now the dream ends differently. I stop walking before the door closes. I look back and see the sky waiting. Timmy grew up, too. We don't talk much about then, but when we do, it's like comparing scars we've both learned to live around. I keep the old key in a drawer. It's rusted now, safe in its uselessness. Proof that freedom can come from the same shape as fear. Some nights, I sit by the window and listen to the wind roll through the trees. It doesn't sound like him anymore. It sounds like distance. Pain never leaves, it just learns better manners. It knocks softly now instead of breaking the door. I used to think the story ended with escape. But it didn't. It ends here, in the quiet, in the choice to stay. Light doesn't ask where you've been. It only asks that you open your eyes when it arrives. Years later, the road looks smaller. The trees that once hid me now bend in the wind like they're bowing goodbye. Sometimes I drive that way, not to remember, but to prove I can. Morning light spills across the asphalt, ordinary and perfect. No sirens. No locks. Just the hum of tires and the sound of a life that kept going. People still ask how I survived. I tell them survival isn't a single moment, it's 1,000 small decisions to keep breathing when the air feels borrowed. There are days I still wake up reaching for walls that aren't there. The mind keeps old habits longer than the body does. But then I open the window, feel the cold on my face, and remind myself, I'm here. Now is real. I visit schools sometimes, talking to kids who think monsters live only in stories. I tell them monsters can smile, too, but so can you. And that smile, that courage, can change everything. I keep a photo on my desk, me and Timmy, both older now, sunlight in our eyes. We don't talk about the past much. We don't have to. Survival already said everything for us. When I look at that photo, I don't see what was taken. I see what came back. The boy who refused to forget his name. The man who finally learned how to say it out loud. My name is Steven Stayner. And I found my way home.